Double Cross, and Other Skills I Learned as a Super Spy by Jackson Pierce. Chapter 3. Like everyone who worked at SRS headquarters, agents, secretaries, even the custodians, my family lived there as well in our own apartment. This whole wing was full of families like our own. Walter and his mom were just a few doors down, actually. I'd never lived anywhere but apartment 300, and even though I was sometimes jealous of regular non-spy kids who got backyards and swing sets, I have to admit I couldn't picture anywhere else feeling like home. We walked silently down the hall to our door. Dad unlocked it and stepped in first. "Aha! Got you!" a tiny voice screeched. I sighed, but Mom smiled. We stepped inside. "Nice try, Kennedy," Dad told her, chuckling. "But I heard you snickering before I even took the keys out." Kennedy jumped down from her perch above the door, where I guess she'd balanced herself between the frame and the ceiling. Kennedy landed, forward rolled, and sprang to standing like she expected applause. "Did you really cheat and do an impression of Mrs. Quattlebaum to beat Walter?" she asked me immediately. "I didn't cheat," I protested. "And how did you already hear about it?" "Everyone knows about it, including Mrs. Quattlebaum," Kennedy said, tipping forward into a handstand. She followed me, walking on her hands. "You'd better watch it. You're seriously in the weeds." "Everyone's in the weeds with Mrs. Quattlebaum," I muttered, opening my bedroom door. "Quiet, both of you. No one is in the weeds with anyone, and neither of you is supposed to know that term," Dad called from the kitchen. "Everyone knows about that, too," Kennedy shouted back. And it was true. It was code. An in-the-weeds status meant the person was supposed to be eliminated on sight. I'd never seen a mission file that actually contained an in-the-weeds target. These days, the only target SRS consistently eliminated on sight was my dignity. "And if everyone jumped off a cliff, would you do that too?" Dad asked. "That doesn't even make sense," Kennedy said, groaning. I used the distraction to step into my room. I shut the door just as Kennedy reached it. "Hey," she whined from the other side, "I wanted to show you a new cheer I learned." "You're not a cheerleader." "Yeah, and you're not Walter's mom, but you still pretended to be," she snapped. "Kennedy, leave your brother alone," Mom's voice boomed. Kennedy sniffed, but then I heard her bound off, probably to scale some piece of furniture. Kennedy wouldn't have any problem passing the physical exam when she tested for junior agent. I was actually surprised her teacher hadn't recommended she take the test already. She was only 9, but there wasn't an age minimum. Most people just didn't have the skill set to pass the exams before they were 11 or 12. But Kennedy, she could pass it. My little sister could be a junior agent before me. Great. There were plenty of alternatives, of course. SRS had dozens of jobs for people who didn't become junior agents and then field agents. I could choose just about any specialty that didn't involve the physical exam, like becoming an agent in the disguise department, tactical support, or research and development. I could be a teacher, or maybe an explosives analyst. I could easily pass the exam to get into home intelligence technical support. We called it HITS, H-I-T-S, which basically meant becoming one of the computer guys. Sit in the control room and shout at agents through a headset, then race office chairs, waiting to hack a security system or forge a clearance card or book a hotel room. They weren't bad guys, the hits. We played video games in the control room when there wasn't an active mission, and unlike my classmates and the junior agents, they never once called me Hail the Whale, Halley's Comet, or Fail Hale. But I didn't want to be in HITS. I wanted to be a field agent. I'd always wanted to be a field agent. They were in the thick of it, the danger, the excitement, the adventure. SRS teachers had a whole spiel about it. Everyone at SRS is important. Everyone has a role to play, from teachers to the tech guys to the research crews. But it never swayed me. I mean, field agents were the real heroes. Who wouldn't want to be a hero? I stared at my ceiling for entirely too long, then rose and changed out of my training clothes. I could hear my parents clattering around making fajitas. They always made fajitas when they'd had a long day, and any day where they had to talk with Otter usually qualified as long. I opened my door and patted down the hallway. "This is insane," my mother said, her voice unusually rocky, even barely audible over the sound of food crackling on the stove. I froze, tilted my head, and listened like an antenna. "We just can't do nothing, Katie," Dad said, voice grave. "Think about what it means." "It doesn't matter," Mom said. "You just don't quit SRS." I pressed against the wall, trying to creep closer. Who wanted to quit? Every now and then you'd hear a rumor about an agent wanting to retire and become a baker or something. But Mom was right. You couldn't just leave SRS. It sounds harsh, but we couldn't exactly have top secret spies retiring to lives of pie making, you know. It was dangerous for everyone. They argued in hushed voices for a moment until finally heard Dad hiss, "Project Ground Cover is going to make SRS even more powerful." "I know, but if it goes wrong, we can't. Not yet. Not until we've figured everything out. We have to play along, pretend like we don't know the truth." Mom's voice dropped at the end and wavered like she might cry. Mom never cried. "What were they? Hale?" Mom was suddenly in front of me, her eyes fiery and dark. I jumped down the hall, nearly tripping over the leg of my pants. "I was just coming to dinner," I said quickly. "I didn't hear anything." "Then how do you know there was anything to hear?" "Okay, I heard something," I confessed, "about someone wanting to quit SRS and something called Project—" "Quiet." Dad looked grave now, way more serious than he usually was inside our apartment, and it scared me a little. "Forget everything you didn't hear, okay, Hale? We shouldn't have been talking about work at dinner time. We broke our own rule." "You broke the rule," Kennedy cried, crashing out of nowhere, an explosion of red hair and flailing arms. I really didn't understand how she could hear so well through all that hair. "Does that mean—" "Yes, yes, yes," Mom said, waving a hand as she turned to go back into the kitchen. She seemed relieved to change the topic. Kennedy and I followed. "Darling," Hale caught us breaking our own rule. "Do we have any ice cream from last time?" "Check the compartment," Dad said. Mom ducked into the freezer, grabbed a hold of what looked like a frozen meatloaf, but was actually a handle to a small but effective hidden compartment. A carton of vanilla caramel swirl ice cream was nestled snugly inside. "I think there's enough for one more go-round," Mom said, as she opened the carton to check. We probably didn't really have to hide the ice cream, even though it was technically considered contraband. SRS agents, after all, had to be in peak physical condition, so ice cream was a treat we got only when we were out on excursions. But Mom and Dad were the team, so they got a little leeway. Besides, anyone who might turn us in could probably be bought off with the scoop. "All right, after dinner, and then your mother and I start following our own rules about bringing work home, because you have no idea how hard it is to sneak ice cream in here." Mom handed me a stack of plates to set the table. Kennedy tried to slink away and avoid silverware duty, but Dad thrust a handful of forks to her before she made it out the door. "Want to hear my cheer now, Hale?" Kennedy asked as she noisily dropped the last fork in its place. "Sure." "Okay," she said, breaking out a wide grin. Kennedy slammed her hands against her sides and dropped her head. Taking a deep breath, she snapped her chin up and began to chant, slamming her arms at different angles around her body. It was pretty stock cheer, lots of "hey, hey, step back, we're on the attack" type rhymes. But she did it with more enthusiasm in her little finger than I think I had in my entire body. When she finished, Kennedy leapt into the air and slid down into a perfect split, grinning and holding imaginary pom-poms aloft. "What did you think?" she asked. I began pretending like I was going to tease her. Her face fell. I smiled. "I think you're right. SRS really should have a cheerleading squad." "I know," Kennedy said, solemnly rising, "but I'm going to convince Dr. Fishbaum. You'll see." I didn't think it was likely that Dr. Fishbaum, SRS's director, was going to be convinced about anything that involved glitter and loud music, but I nodded. Kennedy had been obsessed with cheerleading for a year or two, ever since the SRS kids had gone to the local high school's football game so we could see non-spy kids firsthand. We were supposed to study them so we could blend in better in case we became junior agents. Kennedy basically spent the entire time studying the cheerleaders, and so did a bunch of the boys in my class, but for a very different reason. I spent most of my time with Walter, taking notes and joking about how neither of us had a clue how football worked. I bet he knew how it worked now. Knowing about sports is probably something that just happens when you gain 20 pounds of muscle and lose 130 pounds of Hale Jordan. I took my seat at the table. Kennedy did some sort of crazy pommel horse move to get over the back of her chair to take hers. Mom and Dad joined us. We ate dinner fast, all eager to get to the ice cream, and as a result spent the next 2 hours sprawled out in the living room, clutching our overfilled stomachs. Dad quizzed Kennedy and me on SRS mission history, which devolved into him inventing stories and us adding on. Mom shaking her head at all three of us, smiling. Here's the thing about SRS. It was a secret organization, and we were all in it together. We were all members of this great, big, impressive, awesome thing. But sometimes it was nice to just be a family. Me, Kennedy, Mom, and Dad. A really little, probably sometimes a little boring, awesome thing. They felt like two entirely different places. There was SRS, where I had to prove myself, and there was Apartment 300, where I could just be Hale, and that was enough. Or at least it was enough until the next morning when everything changed.